have a home trust here in Chapel Hill that is a model for the country. People come from all over to find out how we made ours work so well. And we were successful because we realized that we weren't going to take on the whole task by ourselves. We cooperated with Orange County and Carrboro, and we use our tax dollars to help subsidize the nonprofit that owns the land, and we've created hundreds and hundreds of affordable homes in that way, and that's where I think we really stand out. But where we could do a lot better is in the area of rental properties. Today's market is not one where as many people seek home ownership as they used to. Mm-hmm. And we have no way to control rents. And so luxury apartments are being built, and their rents are just astronomical.
Right.
And it's become a challenge to create programs that address that. We have been making some progress.
Right.
I think that the fact that students are not required to live on campus has had a major detrimental effect on housing in Chapel Hill, Carrboro. When I moved back to the area in 1988, I was able to get a 2-bedroom duplex with my daughter just down the street from here on Shelton Street for $500 some a month. And now we're talking about $800 to $1,000 for a 1-bedroom apartment, $1,300 for a 2-bedroom apartment. Those are not affordable. And we have elected officials as well as a community that's been willing to see Chapel Hill become a community that provides wonderful resources and services for those who are wealthy enough to live here, but increasingly are forcing out people who can't compete with students. So, for example, just as one example of that is the Northside community, where folks who traditionally were able to live and afford to live and pass on their homes to their children can no longer pay the rising taxes and can't afford to live there anymore. So students are moving in, and developers have played fast and loose with the rules, which only allow 4 unrelated people to live together, and have tried to get around that in every way possible. But that's just one example of what's happened around the entire community, is that because of high taxes and low availability of affordable housing, we've become increasingly a community that's not for all, and that's really what I'd like to see.
What do you think was kind of the major demands of the constituents and the residents of Chapel Hill with regard to policy?
Well, I think that there's a gap in understanding of the dynamics of the issue. So there are folks talk about the desire for affordable housing, and then there's the kind of policies that can actually be implemented, and there's a big gap between those two. What people believe how the issue functions and the tools that are actually available. There is no money available to subsidize homes to bring them within the range of people who make the median income. Mm-hmm. Nobody's going to subsidize that. But we don't have anybody in Chapel Hill who makes the median income. We have one of the highest income levels in the state. And so, but folks have, firefighters, teachers, people who just make average mid-level incomes cannot find anything to buy here. Not only can't they find anything to buy, but they also, because they make too much money to qualify for what we call affordable housing in Chapel Hill. So there's this huge gap. And the problem is there's no money available to help those folks find housing. So because a lot of the money we get is from the federal government, which requires that we use those dollars at people who are at a much lower income level. Mm-hmm. I mean, when new rental units are opening up that are more than the mortgage I pay for my house, $2,000 to rent a townhouse or a condo, a family can't do that.
Right, I see.
Now, 4 students might be able to do it, each of them $500 a month, and they can have a $2,000 a month rent, and they can make it.
Right.
But a 2-income family of moderate income, let's say 30, 40,000, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say $45,000.
Right.
Both of them making that much, you still can't afford that much rent.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have children, it's totally out.
Right. So how do you see housing segregation in our community primarily? Do you see it as, obviously these are inseparable, socioeconomic or racial? Along what lines do you primarily define housing segregation by?
I think today it's primarily economic. It's my understanding that in the 1800s that we didn't see the same kind of residential segregation we see now, that began to change around the 1890s, 1900s. It was never de jure. In other words, there were never local laws that created racial segregation, but we had de facto, which meant that we had developers who would not show homes to people of color, which historically was African Americans in our community. We did have housing covenants. Again, that was a private effort. So in places like, trying to blank on one of the places I was thinking about, but Dogwood Acres, for example, was a whites-only housing community for a long time. But a biggest issue, and then for a long time, what that meant in this community was that we had communities of African Americans, and they were not being shown and given access to white communities. I think Howard Lee and his wife were one of the first families in Ridgefield to move into what was a predominantly white community. But now I think the biggest issue is economics, that we have a community that is no longer affordable for most people.
So how do you see, basically, can you talk about housing segregation in Chapel Hill? And has this been a big issue, whether it be based on a race or income status? Has this been an issue that you dealt with as mayor or that you look into now?
Well, historically, we have a couple neighborhoods in town that were largely African American, at once upon a time.
Right.
And those neighborhoods were really undervalued because back in the 40s and 50s, those neighborhoods were outside the red line.
Mm-hmm.
African Americans could not buy inside the red line.
Right.
So
Redlining is practiced.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And and the properties they owned they weren't able to realize increased value that comes with home ownership. And those neighborhoods are still have the largest percentage of our African American population, but they're no longer the undesirable properties any longer.
Right.
Because those neighborhoods are really close in to downtown, and everybody wants to live close to downtown.
Right.
Particularly students.
Mm-hmm.
And many of those homes have transitioned to student rentals.
And what's stopping? Obviously, it's a very difficult question dealing with affordable housing and housing segregation. But what are kind of the main hurdles in this path? Is it kind of the people from higher income communities who are against mixed housing? Is it the student pressure? What is kind of stopping you from getting this town to where you think it should be?
I don't think there are of course there are racists everywhere, but I don't think we have neighborhoods in Chapel Hill that are dominated by folks who do not want people of different races in their neighborhood. So that I don't think is true about Chapel Hill today. Now, of course, there are individuals all over whose behavior and beliefs we can't control, but I don't think neighborhoods are dominated by that any longer. But what we do have are folks who are not necessarily looking for big McMansions like they did in the 80s on huge lots. Today, people are looking for homes that are located near things that are near other amenities, like they want to be near a downtown, for example.
Right.
They want to be near restaurants and an entertainment venue, so they can walk and have a different way of living than in a suburban, single-family, quarter-acre lot kind of development, and that's creating a lot of pressure on affordability. Yeah.
So you talked a lot about history in what you just said. How has how has the history of Chapel Hill impacted your current day policy or your approach to the policy with regards to housing?
I think looking at history is critical to crafting policies that can work today, particularly when you are trying to find solutions to historical communities in our town, such as Northside, which is a historically African American neighborhood, or Pine Knolls, which is another one. There are folks who still live there, multiple generations of folks who've lived there and deserve to have a neighborhood they feel comfortable in. And so you have to respect that history in crafting policies. You can't just, as I said before, you can't implement a policy that's going to remove all the value of their home that they have. But you also don't want to create investment neighborhoods that bring in people that completely change the character of the neighborhood.
Right.
So that historical context is really important in crafting successful policies. And I think we've done an okay job, not a great job, maybe not even a good job. We've done an okay job.
So what, kind of elaborating on this a bit, what was the attitude that you saw out of the administration, especially with regard to housing and social justice issues in general?
I think they took a hands-off approach to housing in the community. I think they did very little. There were some things that individual faculty did around housing issues. Della Pollock worked with the Jackson Center to address issues in the Northside community, but it was pretty much left up to the individual initiative of a faculty member rather than the university seeing its responsibility to address that issue.
So do you think the university is doing enough then? You talked about, obviously it's been a great boon for kind of policy-wise, but would you like to see it do more, or do you think that the current amount is pretty appropriate?
No, yes, I think the university can and should do more. But I respect the pace at which they're going, but I think it's time to kind of elevate it. And, I'm talking to a student, I know you're about to graduate, but the bad news, I think, is that for students, is that I think that the university needs to work on the student culture in a way that brings students back to campus. So, the last 2 years is the first time in modern history where the university has mothballed residence halls. I mean, there are residence halls that students don't live in anymore. And now we have apartment buildings off campus that were designed specifically for students to live in.
Right, like Carolina Square or Lux.
Particularly Lux and Shortbread. Mm-hmm. Carolina Square claims that it's multi-generational, that there's not just students there. And there are some families there, but it's mostly students.
Right.
But we've got to stop that. Mm-hmm. That kind of development, I think. The university has a responsibility to be part of creating the solution. And it's been only in recent years, and actually during the time I was mayor, and when Holden Thorpe was chancellor, and continuing into Carol Folt's tenure, where the university has figured out that they need to be at the table. And they're not only there helping us think about policies, and where they bring in all the wisdom of all the PhDs from the university to help us think about it. They not only have done that, but they've also brought money to the table, to help homes not fall into the hands of investors, and we can help us find a way to subsidize homes for people of moderate to lower income, and help families repopulate neighborhoods. And I think that's been a real game changer in how affordable housing policy is going to be moving forward.
For UNC, again, it comes back to, are we a public university training students to see themselves committed to the common good? Or are we a business churning out young people who will just see their goal as doing well for themselves? And if we have UNC leadership at all levels, which are only looking at issues of entrepreneurship and innovation as being the cutting edge issues versus the crisis that we live in today, and the role of the university to train and prepare students to be responsible in their lives, we're missing the opportunity and the responsibility of what I think the university should be about. In terms of the town, I think that we have some well-intentioned leadership, but I don't think they're thinking big enough and broad enough in terms of full democratic participation in the process, and making sure that the voices of everyone in our community is heard versus just those who are wealthier and more affluent.
So on a grander scale, what would be your vision for the Chapel Hill community?
It would be a community that would be a good community for all, that would be affordable to all ranges of incomes, that would be able to provide good jobs with living wages for everybody who lived here, who provides a quality education for all of our children, that provides opportunities for health care, and that has a good climate, that has clean air and clean water. And again, I know that there are federal and state constraints on that, but I don't think that often enough we think about a community for all. That, for example, we built a brand new senior center because we have a lot of elderly people and retirees moving into the community, but we're not putting that same kind of attention into the working poor in our community or those folks who are experiencing homelessness. So what I'd like to do is see a community that's good for everybody, not just wealthy retirees who are able to live here, or the faculty at the university, but for everybody who lives here.